To all the attendees, we appreciate you joining today. We hope that you'll get something out of the next 30 to maybe 40 minutes on some exciting stuff and updates we have regarding, IBM Power and Power Cloud, etc. And just to get this thing teed up, my name is Jim Anderson. I'm a client executive here with Evolving Solutions. I'm actually located in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and my role as a client executive is really to be the, that face and presence to bringing solutions and ideas to our client base in that here in Wisconsin. We're joined with Tim Kluberstadt, and I'll have Tim introduce himself shortly. But Evolving Solutions is what I call a 25-year young company, technology solution provider in a wide variety of different areas. And we're not going to bore you with that today. But one of the areas of greatest strengths that I want to be able to articulate to you is really our heritage and really what we've done in the last 25 plus years, especially at IBM with IBM. And the IBM Power architecture and platform in that. And, we'll hope we'll give you some insights today. I would encourage, this webinar is obviously being recorded, and we'll get that out to you. But in addition, if you have any specific questions in that, please use the Q&A at the bottom, send them to me. As a little bit of incentive, anybody that can send me a question or anything they have, we'll be glad to send you out a $15 DoorDash, coupon that'll go into your account and that. So, with that, Tim, why don't we get rolling here? And thanks, everybody.
Mm-hmm. So I'm Tim Kluberstadt. Thanks for joining, everybody. So today our I guess maybe just a quick introduction to myself. I'm a solution architect here at Evolving Solutions, and I focus on IBM Power systems and storage solutions for our customers. I am not on the sales team, but I do get to help our sales team, and I can work with any of our customers that we work with as a company. So anybody that's doing power stuff, I'm the technical lead and for our group on any power strategy type stuff or any of the implementations, things like that. And then we do have a services team and stuff like that. I'll refer to them as needed, but for today, I think our idea here was to talk about hybrid cloud stuff. And actually, let me go to one of these slides here, and to focus on specifically some of the hybrid cloud capabilities and offerings for IBM Power systems. So I'm a very interactive speaker. I don't mind the questions at all. If you have anything come up you want me to address, by all means, put it in the Q&A. Just by the way, there's a chat function that's totally separate. If you can find the Q&A in the lower right, that's where we want you to put questions for us. That'd be great. And I can try to get to those here, and if it's not something that we can address here, I certainly will address it afterwards. So in general, our philosophy on a lot of the cloud stuff is cloud is not a place. Cloud is a set of disciplines. You've probably heard this before, but Evolving really does live this quite a lot, and this is how we address a lot of the cloud and hybrid cloud discussions with our customers. We really do focus on how on what types of business values you get from different tools that are in the toolbox, so to speak, and then how can we, what use cases can we assign to those, and what are good use cases for each of those types of scenarios. So that's what we're going to talk about a bit today. I have, so in general, why are we here? Like I said, we're not looking to sell anything today. This is just a way for us to get some of IBM's offerings out even to more customers, and to make sure everybody knows that we can help them with these. I'm looking to provide, an overview of what some of these hybrid cloud technologies are individually, but as a group, how they make up that portfolio for IBM customers. And then maybe just to offer a little bit different perspective. I hope that's what I'm trying to do today anyway. So in general, a lot of our customers, are having cloud discussions, and the idea of cloud has actually changed our role of IT And we've had quite a few discussions with customers about it. So I just kind of want to share a few of those things that we've had, success with other customers on, and how we're addressing that evolving change of the role of IT. So there certainly are, transformational things that are happening in industry, and cloud is just one of them, of course. But the idea of cloud is actually, focused on, like I said, some of those business transformation things, but also really about how do we get value from the IT toolbox. And in some cases, the business can potentially get value by going directly to some of those cloud providers. And so how does that change IT's role? I want to address some of that today too, just to help you guys have those discussions with your business, or to help you guys position some of these cloud offerings in an appropriate way so that the business and your users continue to come to you for technology leadership, and not go directly to a cloud provider, for example. Okay, on top of that, I did add some Power 10 stuff in the end here. I'll let you know whatever I can let you know about the Power 10 stuff that's coming soon, and we'll make that part of our discussion toward the end. All right. So to get started, what I typically like to do is just to define different types of users first, and how they kind of overlap. So for example, on the left here is our current AIX or IBMI customer. And if you don't mind, maybe at some point when you have time just to test your chat and QA capabilities, let me know if you are an IBMI user or if you're AIX. And then I can kind of focus a lot of my discussion on AIX or IBMI if there's less of one, or if there's none of the other, we can focus more on what you're looking for. So you're welcome to post that in the Q&A and let us know. But as a use case, customers obviously are a huge one for IBM. And I guess what I want to do is kind of go through what these three different pillars are, and how they're different, but also how they're very much the same nowadays, and how they're becoming more and more the same. So for example, obviously everybody knows what a customer is and a user from that perspective. This is our traditional IT consumer. But more and more customers are less of just a consumer, and they're starting to become more of a technology provider as well. So let me come back to that. MSPs in the middle are those managed service providers and hosting facilities and things like cloud providers. So they have a little bit of a unique business case in that they're trying to do multi-tenancy. They're trying to help customers align to different products. And overall, they have hardware. They're trying to share it with people. And on the far right is a slightly different one. ISVs are customers who are mostly considered consumers because they're consuming the technology, but they're actually developing and creating new solutions for that technology as well. And in that case, they're a provider of the technology and a consumer of the technology. And how that kind of relates to our customers then is more and more, there's a lot of IT departments that are becoming more of a solution provider, or at least they're positioning themselves as solution providers. And the reason for that is because they're competing in a way with managed service providers. They're competing with cloud. And I'm not sure that's healthy for one, but it is a healthy dynamic for the IT industry to evolve and to become more of a provider mindset. And so that's why I kind of think that the AIX IBMI customer is becoming more and more of a consumer and a provider type of a scenario as well. There's a whole bunch of different ways that we can, think of ourselves as IT department and that we're consuming the technology. That's true. But if we also think of ourselves as being the owners of that technology and providing it back to our lines of business, or providing a place for the line of business and your users to come when they have questions or when they have new workloads, then you're very much a technology provider as well as a consumer. And so in a lot of ways, you're not much different than a managed service provider. And so the big thing is that cloud and people getting, people starting to have this concept of consuming technology on a subscription basis is starting to all come together between these three different pillars. They're overlapping use cases more and more every week. Okay, so a couple of things that IBM has done, and I actually Evolving has a number of different vendors that we work with. IBM is just one, but IBM actually is a really good one to talk about cloud with. I kind of like using IBM as a good example because they really do have. I won't say they've been there as long. Obviously, there's other cloud providers that have been doing this longer. But they haven't been doing IT and infrastructure longer. And so IBM has a little bit different perspective about that. And on top of that, obviously IBM is the only major cloud provider that actually does sell hardware. And so their concern is not just for the subscription-based model. Their concern is for IT in general. They want to be able to provide good solutions for people who want to buy and own their own hardware, but they also want to be able to provide good solutions for people who want to use somebody else's hardware in that cloud model. So what IBM has done is actually a pretty good job of creating material and offerings that are flexible for customers. And what I mean by that is not just flexible from a consumption-based thing, but also maybe their users are used to configuring their own hardware and they want to dictate what type of hardware they want to run on, or they want to dictate what type of storage. And some of IBM's offerings do let you do that, so it's very flexible. The other thing, obviously, is because IBM has a pillar on both sides of that, right? Both the on-premise infrastructure and the cloud. They're very much focused on hybrid cloud, which can be on either side of that fence, right? And so the offerings are really good to be able to have on-premise as well as in the cloud workloads, and they want those things to be, to mesh nicely. So they're really focused on the ability to have workloads in both places. IBM, more than other vendors, understands that there are some workloads that are just appropriate to run on-premise, and other workloads that are very good candidates to run in the cloud. IBM also, my second bullet here is IBM also does not pretend to be the only cloud provider. They do understand that there's other places you can go. And so a lot of the tooling that they're creating is actually intended for you to be able to manage not only your on-premise stuff and not only IBM Cloud, but also stuff for other cloud vendors. So they have more universal tooling to help you deliver that value, whether it's from their stuff or others, and they want to be able to provide heterogeneous management of those. Some evidence of that is actually the open standards that they adhere to. There's a lot of Red Hat and Ansible type stuff, very open, and a lot of IBM's tooling is actually built on some of that. So it's very easy for us to help you manage not just offerings from IBM, but from other vendors. So that's the third bullet, is the openness. I know that it's not something that people hear often, but IBM Power is actually the most open platform in the world. Most people think of x86 as open architecture, but actually there's nothing open about how it's built. It's either Intel or AMD or one of the processors. They all have a closed ecosystem, and that's not true for Power. Power has the open community. And actually, if you wanted to start building Power processors on your own, you can become a member of that community and download it and start creating your own Power systems if you wanted. And that doesn't really exist for other ones. So there's a level of openness there, not only in the physical offerings, but also in some of the cloud offerings and the management, as I mentioned before. IBM is not as concerned with the lock-in concept, and they really are trying to facilitate moving between on-premise and cloud type environments. Security and management, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on. Obviously, security is a huge pillar, super important pillar, but it's not necessarily a differentiator. Everybody has to provide security, kind of table stakes there, and the management layer as well. All of these things are stuff that you have to provide as a cloud provider, and therefore it's not really a differentiator, but know that it's very important to IBM, and their offerings account for it. All right, I don't see any questions so far. I do see a couple people posted IBMI interests. I have a few of those, and I haven't seen any AIX yet, but if you have that, put it in the Q&A and I'll be able to see it. Let's see. All right, so let's start off by talking about some of the virtual server offerings from IBM. IBM does have so IBM's cloud, so to speak, has offerings in all kinds of different platforms, and they have software as a service offerings. They have platform as a service offerings. There's lots of offerings in the toolbox. What is a little bit newer as of a year or two ago, and even more so in the last half a year, IBM has a Power Systems virtual server offering where it's very easy now to go create a virtual server for IBMi or AIX or Linux running on Power. These are very typical, cloud-based workloads, right? So it's easy for you to go out there if you have an account already and you've given some information. Anyone can go out there and define a virtual server, and in a few minutes it has created that virtual server. It's found a piece of hardware to run it on, and up and running, and there you go. There's obviously some network things to talk about, but IBM's actually improved some of the networking offerings here lately and making it easier for you to attach and to use networking capabilities between your cloud and your on-premise environments if needed. But generally, the thing that makes this unique is obviously that it's running on Power Systems, and their capability to run IBMi and AIX here. So a couple of things I think that are nice and are interesting. You get to decide if you want to run that on an S922 or if you want to run on a 980. So as a customer or as a person who's configuring this virtual server, you actually get to pick. And obviously for lowest cost and a small environment, the 922 is going to be far better for you. But if you're looking for very large LPARs, a very large workload, more than 15 cores, then you can create these workloads on a 980. And so they are allowing very large workloads and large customers to participate in this well by providing those environments. On top of that, some customers, obviously there's a few very large customers that we've dealt with that have hundreds of LPARs, and again, maybe that 980 is a good option for them there too. But the idea here is this isn't your hardware. You don't need to worry about managing it or anything like that. This is a cloud offering. You're just defining a virtual server, and somewhere off in the cloud, it carves that up for you and delivers it. So you get to specify your memory and compute, like most offerings. But now you also get to decide on tier 1 or tier 3 storage. These are both delivered on IBM's flash system, which is extremely competitive and really great. We could talk about that another day. But the tier 1 is on NVMe flash core modules. They are industry leading. They're really, really quite impressive at the moment compared to a lot of other flash offerings. But that tier 1 offering has a little bit higher price tag than the tier 3. So if it's just development environments or just so that you have a practice and play around area, yeah, the tier 3 I suggest is still SSD, and it's very capable, no problem.
Hey, Tim, we got a question that came in regarding from an IBM I OS level.
Okay.
What is the minimum supported levels of IBMi?
Yeah, that's a great question. So IBMi specifically, 7.2 and 7.3 and 7.4 are all supported on Power 9. But specifically for IBM Cloud and some of the cloud capabilities, they found customers are still looking for 7.1. So very late last year, actually, IBM brought back support for 7.1 on the S922, and they are now offering that in their cloud offerings. So we can actually select an IBMi 7.1 OS version in the cloud virtual server, and you can have a 7.1 LPAR running there. So for example, if you have if we're looking to upgrade hardware and we still need to be able to support that older version, this might be a great use case for, let's just move that to a cloud. We'll pay for that, pay per use on that particular workload, and the rest of our workloads we can, maybe upgrade easier for some reason or whatever that is. And if those things can go to the next version of the hardware, then you're off and running. Yep. Good question, Jim. Let me know if any of those come in again.
Yep.
Okay, last thing on here, data centers. IBM has a lot of data centers worldwide. The virtual servers weren't necessarily running in all of them, but I can barely keep up with this list now. They have added 2 more in the last couple of months, and they continue to add locations to this. That's another interesting part of this, is that when you define a virtual server, you can pick your geography, and if you want that somewhere if you want some locality specific to where you're running the workload, then we can certainly do that. Okay, any other questions on some of this stuff, Jim, in the queue there?
No, nothing yet. Nope, that was the first question.
All right, great. Yeah, this is a slide on SAP HANA specifically, but I just want to show that you don't have to create these virtual servers just generically. There are a number of pre-configured, virtual server offerings that are specific to a particular workload. So if you're looking for an SAP HANA one, as this example is, you can define an SAP HANA workload and deploy it right from the cloud interface. It'll create the LPAR, it'll install the Linux for you, and it will deploy HANA on top of it, and you're ready to go. It's a pre-configured instance. You can get up and running fairly quickly. So there's a number of these out there. There's a whole catalog full of virtual server offerings, and what we talked about on the previous page are more generic ones where we can just define an IBM I or an AIX LPAR, and once the operating system comes up, you basically get a login, and you can do whatever you want on top of that. And these are more workload specific for whatever that is that you're trying to run. And so, in fact, you'd probably have to look through the catalog a bit. A lot of third-party vendors and things have helped IBM define a virtual server that you might be able to deploy that comes pre-configured and set up for you. Okay. For some of these things, I'll keep moving fairly quickly, but all right. So a couple other use cases. Let's see. I might skip some of this and go to the more interesting stuff on our list here, Jim. But let me know. Certainly, a lot of customers are using their first foray into cloud is oftentimes just a test environment. Again, for those OS upgrades, if you're an IBM I and you're currently running, 7.3, and maybe you want a 7.4 environment to play on, this is a great utility to have in your toolbox, right? You can define that 7.4 environment just by selecting 7.4 from the drop-down box. It will deploy a 7.4 instance, and it'll be up and running in a few minutes. And you can start, using 7.4, seeing what it's all about and what's different. You can potentially move a few of your queries there, things like that. And obviously, there's more work to pushing a full set of your data and applications out there. I don't want to diminish that, but as far as actually deploying an instance for you to get that test capability, it's very quick and easy.
Tim, a question that just came in, and I'll paraphrase it from the OS, from an upgrade perspective. If you're in a shared environment, how far in advance does IBM give you to say that they're going to do a version release upgrade?
So this isn't so you're saying if IBM's managing the OS level?
Correct. Yes. Yeah. Yep. That's what I'm implying.
Yep, and that's not actually how this works. These are version-specific virtual servers that are created out here. And obviously there are other managed service providers that would do the management, but this offering by itself does not have managed services with it. So IBM would deploy the OS level that you specify, and then they make it available to you and you manage it after that. And so if you wanted to do upgrades, things like that, that would be separate from what IBM's delivering through the virtual server offering. But managed services providers are often helping with that stuff on their own. Yep. And there certainly are offerings outside of IBM that we can help with if if that level of involvement is what customers are looking for. Okay. The other big one is the DR stuff. It's pretty easy to add a DR capability by just spinning up a cloud-based virtual server, and all of a sudden we have a target for ourselves. We can replicate to that and have that capability without having the data center and infrastructure investments. So, okay, I don't see any more questions so far, Jim. So I did want to provide a couple of examples of minimal configurations for IBMI and AIX. Obviously, the pricing is a little different. IBMI has a lot more software in the stack. And generally speaking, 80 gigs is probably the smallest tier 3 storage that we're going to likely be able to configure for an I. So I didn't bother looking at like a 20 or 10 gigabyte IBMI instance. That just doesn't make sense. So generally speaking, I would say this is about the smallest thing I've seen from an IBMI perspective. That's a quarter of a core and 4 gigs of memory with 80 gigs of storage on the tier 3 level. And the LPPs and stuff are included with the subscription, so you don't have to buy extra. If you do want the rational suite for some of your compilers and things like that, then that would be a little bit extra. And there is a simple option. You can click on it, and it will make the compilers available on the build. But for roughly $400 a month, and again, if we were to break that down for just a playground for you to have a playground for 2 or 3 days at a time, it's actually quite inexpensive. And the only caveat is that you would want to destroy it so that you'd stop the subscription and not consume any more of your credits. A more realistic and maybe slightly larger configuration, again on tier 3 storage, but maybe a half a core. And then I added RDW into this so that it's more of a complete environment. But maybe that's a more realistic if you're looking to run a small production workload, things like that. I have the AIX ones on here too. Obviously, there's less software on the AIX, and 2 gigs of storage is not unusual there, and certainly less storage on the back end. So $50 a month is actually pretty reasonable, I think, for an AIX running on a Power server. All right. Obviously, at the bottom, I want to note if you have specific requirements, I can get you these very quickly. I can give you estimates on this stuff and help with that. So you're welcome to reach out. I can certainly make the pricing and stuff available quickly. So,
Tim, another question that's come in is regarding just backups in terms of both physical tape and those capabilities. Is that something that the Power Cloud can offer as a service?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's multiple ways to do backups. IBM has, especially was that an IBMI specific question?
That was an IBMI specific question, yes.
Yep. Okay. So IBMI has, as you know, a little bit of different requirements for doing backups. There is an object method of doing backups, but it does require a little bit of storage on your LPAR first. But IBM certainly does support that and the cloud object storage capability in the cloud. Secondly, though, and if you prefer a little more robust solution, IBM has a partnership with DSI to provide a VTL, a virtual tape library capability. And we actually sell quite a few of those as well to customers who are looking for virtual tape. But that virtual tape offering does have a virtual server in the catalog, and you can deploy a DSI virtual server in the IBM cloud and use that just like any other tape device then. So it would have licensing and all that included with the subscription, and that will actually look just like a tape library for you, and you could use it with BRMS and everything like you always have. So there's a number of ways to do backups. I'm happy to get into details on that whenever if somebody has a question. You bet.
Thanks, Tim.
Yep. So we've talked mostly about some of the public cloud offerings and technologies. I want to spend a few more minutes making sure that you understand that some of these technologies are also available if you want to continue owning your own hardware, and that was part of our point up front. So a very quick history lesson here if you're not familiar with this chart. IBM puts this in a lot of our Power stuff, and I love it. partly because this is when I started at IBM and logical partitions came out shortly after. I was in development for a bit there, and then ended up in lab services where I helped test and create a lot of the requirements that published a lot of these offerings. So I've worked very closely with them, and it's kind of it's not entirely my career path, but it follows a lot of what I've done in my career, and some of the stuff on here is just fun for me. So in a sense, the way down in the lower left, just LPARS itself was an interesting invention in 1999, and obviously we had that capability very early to use capacity on demand and some of those things. As we progress the market partitioning, very small, very small partitions, you know, a quarter or even a 20th of a core, and now we progress through mobility and the capacity on demand type stuff. And eventually we work our way up to enterprise pools, which is where I want to start here. Enterprise pools was a capability that was delivered in 2013, mostly for the high-end enterprise class machines, the 795 type stuff, very large refrigerator, you know, and multiple rack type machines. The idea of enterprise pools was that that machine already had the capability where you buy, you know, processor books, but I don't necessarily activate everything that I buy. So the idea there was I'm going to buy and install 64 cores, but I'm only going to activate 40 of them. And so I only want to pay for 40 activations. And you could do the same with the memory. This was all the way down here in some of the utility stuff, to be honest. What enterprise pools did was said, all right, I've purchased these against one serial number, but now I want to share those between the machines that I own. So these are activations that I own. Is there any reason why I can't use them somewhere other than where I purchased them? And the enterprise pool basically allowed us to do that. So the idea there was to create mobile activations that you could, you know, purchase against whatever serial number, doesn't matter. But I want to be able to deploy that and use it on other serial numbers. And when I do, for example, live partition mobility, then those activations are able to be moved or reassigned through the pool, and then I can. I'm not paying for additional stuff or things on other machines that I'm not using when it's dark. The evolution of that. Oops, I'm sorry. The evolution of that has actually come to more of a consumption-based model, specifically to help with the cloud-based stuff called Enterprise Pools 2.0. So that's what I'm going to introduce here and talk a little bit more about. So here's our Power 9 system options very quickly. And you know, obviously the 980 is a modular unit that you can put 4 of these together to get a very large machine. And the enterprise pools capability for a long time and until just last year was always on that type of a box. But now actually the pool capability is actually being delivered into the small machines as well. And that makes some interesting use cases for us. So we can now do pooling on the 922 and the 924. And to be honest, they can even join the same pool. So I can have a pool of machines that consist of both of these models together, and I can move workloads between them however I want, and it's very interesting. Even if you don't have multiple machines, this pooling capability is still quite attractive. I'm going to get into that here. So first of all, what is pooling and how does it work? Specifically the pools 2.0. The pools 1.0 is where you bought activations and they were purchased against a serial number, but they were delivered to the pool. And then you had to go to the HMC and assign them to a particular machine. Pools 2.0 is very different in that you buy whatever resources that you want to own, and then we add it to the pool and it actually activates everything in the system anyway. And then what happens is you're connecting your systems, your HMCs in fact, to this cloud management console, and I'll show you some pictures of that here. But the cloud management console is then recording and not monitoring, but kind of keeping track of how many resources you are actually using on the machine. So for example, if I buy a machine with 20 cores and I only need 5, In fact, maybe 5 or 10 cores is your peak. And what Pools 2.0 says is, let's not buy for your peak anymore. Let's buy for what you actually need most of the time, and that's going to be called your base. So maybe it's only 2 cores that you actually purchase the activation for. And then anytime you go over the 2 cores, it's reporting to this cloud management console in every minute, essentially. And if you go over the 2 cores that are your base, then you're consuming credits to match whatever you use. But all 20 cores on that machine are yours to use whenever you want. Okay, so it's more of a consumption-based model, and you can see how that fits very nicely into IBM's cloud or hybrid cloud capability. The idea here is that we're working more toward metered usage and a pay for what you use type of a model. And you can set that base, however many you want to buy, to as many as you want. Obviously, you pay a little bit of a premium for that base, but the idea here is that the credits themselves are actually fairly inexpensive. So it might be a lot more cost advantageous to you to not buy all the activations that you would need to handle your peak workloads. So we're only buying what we need to handle our averages. And then when we do go over peaks, we consume credits. So I'll get to the credits in a minute. They're actually very inexpensive, and you can lower the total cost of ownership of your power environment by making use of some of this Pools 2.0. Even if you just have one machine, the idea is that maybe at the end of the month, you certainly use 2 or 3 times the number of processors. No problem. Let's pay for those processors only while you're using them. And when we're not using them, we're not paying for them. We don't have SWAMA, we don't have to activate them. It's all just part of your base back on whatever that 2 cores is. Okay. Also in this is that these are shared resources across the entire group of systems that you consider your pool. So if you have 3 systems, as in this example, I think I have a better picture of this. If you have 3 systems, as in this example, if any one machine is using more than his base, you're not necessarily consuming credits because some other system might be using less than his base. And so it's an aggregated total across the entire group of servers that is what we're measuring against. And so as long as you stay under your aggregated base, you are not consuming credits. So very powerful stuff there. You can move workloads between systems whenever you want. The key part of it is that everything on the floor is active and it's yours to consume. If a system for some reason does fail, you can move all those workloads and start consuming, and your base, or I should say your consumption against the base, doesn't change. So you're not paying more for that capability anymore. You're using resources that you own, just in a different place. There's also a question always comes up, but so I'll answer it directly. There's also no site restrictions here. These could all 3 be on different sites. It's no problem as long as they're all in the same country and part of the same enterprise. You're welcome to share, activations between your production and your DR system, or between multiple systems for development and test. However that works, it's any combination. All we're doing is measuring what you're using against what you've paid for. And if you go over that, you're consuming credits. Second big thing here is it's not just processor activations, it's actually the OS licenses as well. That's true for IBM I and AX and Linux. So we can create our base with however many OS licenses we find appropriate. And if we go over that, we can consume credits for the activation of the core and potentially, I should say, or potentially the OS license itself separately. So very powerful stuff. If your OS is a more expensive pillar and you want to have fewer of those, we can certainly do that here, and we don't have to buy for our peaks now. That's what this function is delivering. Okay. This is a couple pictures of our cloud management console. I'm certainly happy to go through this in more detail. I know I'm a little bit short on time, so I'll go quicker in order to get to the Power 10 stuff. But this is the cloud management console specifically for PEP2. And this is on the IBM cloud, in fact, but it's what your HMC would connect to and report resource usage. Besides just having the inventory available, which is on the far left, it does display all the machines. It displays what LPARs are running. It displays how your resources are being consumed at any given time. So this management console is actually interesting and useful, even if it's just one machine. It does provide a number of other things. There's some advanced monitoring here, but there's also some metered usage and alerting that can happen. So for example, if you wanted to set a budget of how many credits you're going to consume in a given month, it can alert you when, for example, you've only, it's only the third day in the month, but you've already consumed 20% of your credits for the budgetary month. So it does have lots of ways to help you manage the credit consumption and things like that. So very cool tool. This would be part of any PEP 2.0 implementation, and we can get into more details of that whenever you have time. So,
Hey,
important.
Tim, before you get into Power 10, we two more questions just came in. First one is, we're an existing Mimics customer today. Can I still use Mimics if I just put my DR up in the Power Cloud?
Absolutely. Yep. So how you do your application is completely up to you. Like I said, that Power Cloud offering is just the OS level, and if whatever data and applications you deploy there, including Mimics, which is really just an application for replication, you're welcome to install that and manage it how you always have, no problem.
And then second part of that question was, how do I get my data into the Power Cloud if I'm on premise today and I want to just test out stuff?
Yeah, that's a tricky question. Probably deserves some additional discussion, more than we can do today. But
okay.
You can certainly, the object cloud storage that we talked about specifically, that's a really good one for IBMi, because that object cloud is available to you no matter where you are. So you can save to that cloud on your local machine, and it would be available to machines in your Power VC environment on IBM's cloud, because it's in the cloud. So some of those object-oriented backups are really handy for moving data to the cloud. But there's other ways as well, including, we can actually send a tape there. We can actually, transfer data other ways. We can actually use Mimics to move it there. So there's a number of ways we use to get customers migrated into a cloud environment, depending on how much and what their requirements are for what they're doing there. Okay, great. Yeah, here's our metered usage statement. I'm going to skip through some of this just to make sure we get to the end here, and hopefully this has been interesting, but this is the very important page I was looking to show you. The credits, actually, this is the credit consumption. And I've done a little bit of math on the right. The table on the left is how IBM gives it to you, and basically how you're supposed to read this. Let's use the far right column, this one here. So the 922, 924, for one credit, if you buy one credit, that is the equivalent of 2,000 minutes of IBMi usage, essentially. So about a day and a half. So after a day and a half, you would have consumed one credit. So the credits are $240 a piece. That's the list price that's published, and you can get those online or through a partner like us. And for $240, that gives you a day and a half of IBMi credits, so to speak. The processor activation is separate, of course, like I mentioned, 130,000 minutes for one credit. So for that $240, you'd get 130,000 processor minutes. So when we add that up, if you take into account the cost of buying a license and buying the activation of a core, it's actually quite economical to consume credits. So for an IBMi example, I'll use that because I know we have a couple of IBMi people out there. On the far right here, it's equivalent of, on a 922, it's equivalent of 116 days before it would have made more sense for you just to buy the license. And that's because on the 922, that license is much less expensive. It's a P10. On a 924, the equivalent is almost 300 days you'd have to run. And that, you remember, that means you're running one core more than what your base is 100% of the time, every minute of the day, for 300 days before it would have made more sense for you just to buy the license. So pretty good value there actually, and especially if your workload has a lot of peaks and valleys, if it fluctuates a lot from hour to hour, minute to minute, or even on specific days, there's a lot of value that you can get out of the cloud capabilities that IBM is providing through this Power Enterprise Pools 2.0. So we're only buying what you need, and then we can pay for the rest with credits on a variable basis. Okay. No, we're getting a little short here, so this is a quick summary. I'm happy to send this out if somebody has any of these, but that's a quick summary of the idea. What I wanted to get to is this assessment. IBM has some offerings as well to help you figure out, based on your current workload, how many activations should I buy and how many credits should I consume to minimize my total cost of ownership. And so we can do an evaluation of that by pulling some of the metrics off of the system that you're running today, and how the processor is assigned to those LPARs. And then basically we can provide an assessment and then some graphs of, although today you own, 8 cores and you're running, you're not actually using those full 8 cores for 100% of the time. So it might actually be cheaper for you to only own 2 or 3 cores and consume credits for the time that go above that line. And that'll reduce your SWAMA, that reduces your Power VM costs, that reduces a lot of other things on the infrastructure side. And you are going to consume credits in that model, but we can make those part of the solution and work them right into it with you so that you are minimizing your total cost of ownership for the environment. All right. Power 10, I don't see any other questions. Jim, did you have any more come in?
No, not at this time. Nope.
Yep. Okay.
Home
so
stretch.
everybody, yep. Clearly, everybody would probably like to hear about the Power 10. There's only so much that I'm allowed to say at this point, so I'll make sure that you know the important points. Power 10 is definitely coming. It is going to. Their announcement will come next month, actually, and the important thing is that next month the announcement will be just for the very large machines. So oddly enough, IBM is delivering the enterprise server first. It's not the first time they've done that, but it is quite rare that they do that. And then the smaller machines, the scale out ones, the 1, 2 socket and the 4 socket machines will come early next year. There is a little bit of documentation out there. The chip itself has been published. So if you've been paying attention, if you'd like some links, I can send you some links. But if you'd like to see some of those, the performance of the core itself has been publicized, along with this. I'm not sharing anything here that you probably can't find, unfortunately, on your own. But whatever that Power 10 equivalent is of this machine will be coming very soon. And then the capabilities of that, the Power 10 has been quite impressive. Like I said, there's some really good articles out there that were published even a few months ago, partly from the open community and some of our vendors that write about Power all the time. They've been publishing some of the things that they're seeing with performance of the Power 10, and it's very, very impressive. With that, I think that's all we have for today. Jim, did you have anything else that we need to follow up on?
No, those were the questions that came in. To those people that did provide sent a bunch of questions in, appreciate it. We'll get you your DoorDash certificate sent out to you. But other than that, we appreciate your time, everybody. We'll follow up with you with this presentation and look forward to maybe looking to rekindle some ideas about non-traditional ways of how your power infrastructure is provided today and potentially into the cloud. So
yep. I hope this was helpful. Obviously, we touched on a number of these topics very quickly, and there's a whole lot more. I don't like to beat people up with slides, but we could certainly go into more discussion, and I'm happy to do that. You're welcome to reach out to me at my contact information, which was in early here. But if you have questions on any of this, we're happy to help. No commitment needed for that, but we certainly like to help customers understand these offerings. So reach out by all means, and I'm happy to do that.
Very good. Everybody, thank you so much for your attendance, and look forward to, we'll follow up with you over the next several days. And other than that, have a great Have a great day, everybody.